Hi there. My name is David Batsoffen, and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. And at the moment, I'm doing a series called In Conversation With. And today, I'm in conversation with Caroline McCann, who is, I have no idea. She has so many hats. She's like a juggler. She was an advocate. She's no longer an advocate. Maybe she is an advocate. I don't know. She was a butcher. She isn't a butcher. She is a butcher. She could be a butcher. She works with small farmers. Does she? Doesn't she? My learned colleague here, Caroline McCann. Carolyn, how are you?
Morning, David. Thank you so much. And I always do make it difficult when people say, hey, so what do you do? So
Yeah.
I apologize.
How do we box you?
That's the secret. I don't
Yeah.
like boxes.
But how did you go from being an advocate to being a butcher to being where you are today working with small farmers? That's a heck of a journey.
You know, it's very interesting because I think that when you're a busy person, you'll relate to this completely, is that you're so busy getting the next interesting thing done that before you know it, you look back and you've had this incredible lifetime of adventure. And I've just been blessed to be the same. My initial decision to stop practicing law and to buy a Braeside meat market happened because I had burnout. I had absolute complete fatigue. I was way too young to be handling the cases that I was. It was intense. It was NUM that in those days, Gwedi Mantashe was actually the head of. It was fighting over in the security industry. The NUM had to deal with a gold mine that had taken its security division and sold it to, in those days, Securicorp. And it was violent. Literally, people were being killed. It made the headlines of our papers for a fairly substantive period of time, and it killed me. It was just too much. So when my aunt Yolande Wallace took me out to dinner for my birthday, she looked at me and she said, "Kat, you're very tired. I think you should buy my business."
And did you know anything about the meat business?
I knew nothing. In fact, it was a standing family joke because I'd grown up saying there are three things I will never do. I will never cook for myself, I will never clean for myself, and I will never get married. And so there I was, married, knowing very little about food, cleaning my own home, and buying a butchery.
As an advocate, surely you could have sued yourself.
What I should have done is had myself committed, but not to the bar.
Or maybe to a different type of bar where you could have.
Yes.
Yes. But if we go back to a young Caroline, what did you want to be when you got to matric, for instance? Did you know you were going to go into law, or was it something you were gently coerced into because of family pressure?
I have, for my entire life, had a very strong sense of justice. I had a mother who grew up coming from Durban and then moving up to Johannesburg, having had a very difficult life. Her mom is Lebanese, my gran was Lebanese. And when my gran arrived in Durban with her then British husband, who was significantly older than her, she landed up being separated because our beautiful apartheid government didn't believe that she was white. And my mom was born in this very difficult place, in a country that didn't know how to deal with it because she looked white, but her mom didn't really. And so what do you do? And so my mom had this very strict understanding of justice and fairness. And so did I. And so famously in grade 1 at Birchacres Primary School in Kempton Park, it had just opened up its new premises where it's now been forever. And my teacher made us all stand up and we all had to say what we want to be when we grow up. And I stood up and I said, "My name's Caroline and I want to be a lawyer because I don't like bad people being bad to other people."
Wow.
Yeah. So that's why I became a lawyer, an attorney, an advocate eventually.
You don't do things by halves, do you now?
No. Hence the burnout and having to buy a butchery because I was promised sleep.
I was going to say, if you burnout to butchery, surely is almost an oxymoron, because In the olden days, butchers used to be open at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So their stores did. So I'm assuming they got to work at 4 or 5 o'clock to prepare for the day. So sleep was the furthest thing from their minds. So how did you?
Luckily,
Yeah.
so sorry, I was going to say, luckily my aunt had run Braeside for 6 years. Phenomenal woman. She had, at 27, which actually was the age that I was when I bought the butchery, she did a complete pivot in her life. She had been in corporate world and decided to open a restaurant in Durban, and she had built her reputation up as this incredible restaurateur. And when she had left Durban, come to Joburg, she had done the same thing and landed up in Parkhurst by complete fluke. In fact, it was through love, but we'll call it fluke. And she bought the butchery because, like me, she had had enough of restaurant hours. So she bought the butchery and deliberately designed it not to open early and not to close late.
So tell me about do you remember your first, pardon me, do you remember your first day when you walked into the butchery and said to the staff, "Hello, I'm your new owner and I know nothing about meat except how to eat it."
You know that expression, fake it till you make it?
Yep, you still are.
Still am. Yeah, hopefully this cake will get to the point of being cooked soon. Actually, that first day was the 1st of May 2000. And what was interesting is that the very first order I ever did was for Savaro, who owned, in those days it was Europa, and now it's Bottega. And he came running across. It was closed. The butchery was closed because it was a public holiday and we were doing stock count. This was the official handover. And he came running in and he saw my aunt. He was like, "Hey, yo, I need some cubes, please." And he looked at me. He was like, "Oh, I don't know who you are." We introduced ourselves. My aunt said, "Oh, your first order, Care. Go cut some beef cubes." And with enthusiasm, I picked up a knife. It must have been because it had a sharp blade. And ran into the cold room and there was just meat. And I went, "Oh."
Where do I start?
Picked up what I thought was a hunk of meat, didn't know what meat, took it out, and my aunt looked at me and her face fell. She said, "Boy, I can't leave you alone for a long time. That's rump. You do not want to cut rump into cubes."
So I take it you learned the various cuts of meat very quickly, because otherwise you're going to be dishing out expensive meat for cheap cuts.
I did. And, from a business perspective, I learned so much. Up until then, I'd spent 7 years consulting to businesses, generally that were going through restructurings or for very sort of high level disciplinary inquiries and that kind of thing. And so what happened was I took over this business with this huge background of knowledge, but never lived it. And so, for example, 30% of the staff I dismissed in the first 3 months. Another 30% I dismissed in the next 3 months. So within 6 months, 60% of the workforce had gone. And if you go and you read management books, they'll tell you that ordinarily a change of ownership, at least 50 to 60% of your staff, you have to move out. Because what you find within company cultures, you get 3 types of people. Those who meet company culture and they meet target, you want them. Those who meet company target but don't have company culture, you have to get rid of them. And then you get those who meet company culture but don't meet target. You want them because you can work with them. And that's what I found. Yeah.
Wow.
And through that, the good people taught me.
I was going to say, you couldn't have been very well liked for those first few months.
Oh, goodness. And did they teach me? Goodness.
Really? I'm sort of comparing you in my mind to the writer of Game of Thrones, because he wrote lead characters out and they didn't know. He wouldn't give them he'd give them only enough pages for a particular scene without giving them the ending. I mean, I don't know if you were a throner, but the Red Wedding nobody saw coming. And we all watched in horror as an entire family was murdered of lead characters. And when he was asked why he did this, he said because he could. It was his book. So you're doing a similar thing by going in, and I do understand the rationale on a serious level, the rationale behind it, because you needed to know that the team that was going to be going forward with you were people that were going to work with you and not against you, because they had to
Absolutely.
teach you, and you had to be willing. You also had to be willing to learn from them, and in the
Yeah,
correct manner. And did you?
absolutely. You know, I did, but it was interesting because the people who saved me, first of all, it was not my aunt, because God bless that beautiful woman's soul. She had promised me that she would stay with me until December that year. So 1st of May, I tried to cut rump into cubes for poor Sabbath Bottego. That was a bad idea. And 1 week later, she hopped on a plane, went to the UK, and I didn't see her again for 3 years. So
Talk about being thrown in at the deep end.
completely, right?
Yeah. Your Honor, I'd
and
like to bring to your attention the fact that she's broken contract.
Yeah. I still love her though.
You don't talk to
So,
her, but you love her.
absolutely. So it was actually chefs who saved me. My aunt had, up until that point at Braeside, she'd focused almost exclusively on the walk-in customer, and she'd taken all her knowledge and experience as a chef, and she would do interesting cuts, and she would do beautiful, delicious marinades. But she didn't really care where the meat came from. She was a hard negotiator and still is. The cheapest that she could get is what she would then use. Anyway, she had started supplying a couple of people, and the very first person who helped me was Rudy Liebenberg, who now is at the Mount Grace in Cape Town. And Rudy was a young chef. He had just started at Saxon Hotel as a sous chef, and he was just and still is the nicest, kindest man. And he came into the butchery within the first couple of weeks, and he took one look at me standing there with these big eyes, a bit of a guppy. And he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, I don't know what I'm doing." And he said, "Okay, come into my kitchen. As and when I get meat, I'll show you what it is I do in my kitchen. And I'll help you understand why I do what I do. And, you know, all I ask in return is, please, when I show you something, promise that you'll cut it that way. Because butchers in this country don't want to listen. They do things their way and only their way, and it doesn't work for chefs." And went to Rudy. From Rudy, there was a whole bunch of other really well-known chefs now, but in those days, they were just the hooligans who taught me everything I knew about meat. And then I would go back and with authority say to the guys, "No, you do not cut it that way. Move away from the bandsaw, pick up your knife, sharpen your knife, stand straight. Make sure that your legs are slightly apart. If you're going to lean in, make it a whole back movement so that, you know, that's what landed up happening." So it was chefs. It was chefs who made me.
You see, I don't think people who walk into a butchery know anything about that. And the majority, I think, of South Africans will not even walk into a butchery. They'll go to a supermarket and they'll just look, and it says rump and it's 150 bucks. And I'll pick up another piece of rump, it's 100 rand, I will have the 100 rand. And they walk out. As you say, they have no idea how that meat was farmed, where it was butchered. And when they go into a butchery, then they want to start trouble, because now they're used to prepackaged and now there's dead stuff hanging all around. They don't know what they want, or they believe they know what they want. They get angry with the butcher, who in return, some of the butcheries I've been into are large and carry weaponry. And you don't want to argue with them because they can fight back. You know?
Absolutely.
So how do you, or how did you educate your customers into, they've seen a particular cut that up until you took over had been there. Now the cut, it's the same meat, cut slightly differently. How did you train them to go, aha, that's how it's meant to be?
So that's where my dad's side of the family, the Irish side, came out. Because the one thing that I seem to be blessed with is when I speak, people seem to enjoy speaking to me. And so it was quite easy. And so very quickly, we'd land up with queues out the door in Parkhurst. And if you can remember the store,
Yeah,
some people would get so aggravated, but they would stand. In fact,
friendships were formed in that queue, Caroline.
And one marriage with a person who is a recovering vegan. So it actually, that was the easiest part, and that was the easiest sell. The more difficult sell that I had And that actually is what truly landed up making me so-called famous or well-known, was the moving from your traditional meat to free-range grass-fed meat. That process took 5 years, but when the light came on for me, I knew that I couldn't live out the rest of my days with that little girl saying no injustice. I couldn't allow that injustice to continue any longer, and that's really what propelled me to where I am today.
So was there a seminal moment where Caroline McCann went from the butcher that everybody didn't know to the butcher that everybody did know and wanted to buy from?
Yeah, so I'd separated from my ex-husband, in July, and it was hugely traumatic. I had a very tiny baby. Ethan, my son, was born in the January of that year. The July we were separated. My eldest son Joshua was 3.5, and my aunt, my God savior, she said to me in the September, "Come to the UK. Just spend 3 weeks with me. You really need to." The whole family was worried about me. And she said, "You really just need some time out." My mom, who was still alive in those days, she said, "Don't worry, I'll look after the butchery for you." So off I went to the UK. And I found myself walking the streets of different parts of London, pushing Ethan in his pram and Joshua. I kept going into butcher shops. And those that I connected with, I kept hearing, this is the breed of the animal, this is the farm that it came from, this is what it ate, this is why it's a little bit tough at the moment, or this is why it's really sweet and you want it now. And I realized I knew nothing about the meat that I was purchasing, other than it came in very, very quickly when I placed my order with Caroline Beef. And it was, great business, because they're the largest meat business on the African continent. And right at the end of the trip, I kissed my aunt goodbye, and she said, "Are you going to be okay?" And I said, "I'm going to be better than okay, because I know what I need to go and do." And that literally was it. That's what started me.
Wow. And now the journey has taken you onwards, upwards, moved you around, shaken but not stirred, or stirred but not shaken. we find you now in yet another incarnation.
Yeah. And it was an interesting one, because it was a difficult discussion having with Caroline Beef. I have huge respect for the Caroline family. I know Matthew. We've known each other for a long period of time, and I'll give him his due. Him and his dad, who I've never met either, but I've known Matthew. We have mutual respect, and I think an understanding. But in those days, I met with my sales rep and their sales director at, in fact, Bottega. I'll say, such a good man. The sales director said to me, the meeting lasted half an hour, and it ended with him saying to me, "Look, you just stick to what you do. You, a sweet, lovely young lady on the corner of a street in Parkhurst, you don't need to worry where your meat comes from. Our animal scientists have this sorted. The dietitians know that it's the right thing to do, and all you need to be very grateful for is that we give you good prices, because they are good." And that was it. Never again.
What part of the beast had he unleashed? That is
Yep.
so dismissive on so many levels.
Yeah. But that's the meat industry. And even to a large extent today, that's the meat industry.
But I suppose it's like any industry that is driven by men who believe that they know. I sound like an advocate for feminism, but I am in a certain sense that they don't listen. And if you know more than them, that you're not showing them up. You wanted something. You'd seen something in Britain that you wanted to replicate here. And I've watched some of those food programs from England. And those old school butchers do. I mean, short of sticking a finger up the carcass's bum, and they can tell you where they come from. And they dress the part. And there's a whole ritual about going to your corner butchers, like going to a pub. And you build up the loyalty and that type of thing. So to be so dismissed and brought down to, well, we give you good prices type of thing, take your beef and shove it, baby.
Absolutely. And that really was from day one. That is what I realized. And that's why even now I have huge respect for what my aunt was able to do, is that not only were we women in a male-dominated industry, we were both young. We had to deal not just with the Afrikaans patriarchy that is very strong still in the meat industry, but most of the staff in the meat industry in this country are black men. And black men are very fixated with culture and cultural traditions and how they engage with women. And I think we see that to a large extent in our gender-based violence figures. And it's not because all men are blah, 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 and culture allows them. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they are very fixated on the head of this household is a man, and what I say goes. And so that's from the get-go what I had to deal with. And as I say, to a large extent, I still see it. Just as an aside, a couple of years ago, I was very fortunate to be able to run a National Butchers Challenge. The idea being that we'd choose a team of 6 good butchers who would be able to go and represent South Africa at the World Butchers Challenge. And the first team that was chosen was a group of people. It was 6 guys who, well, except for the one, they'd all known each other for a long period of time, mostly Afrikaans men. And within 3 training sessions that we were supposed to have, our relationship completely broke down because what I said, they refused to listen to. And it was very difficult for me to once again face this and go, but I really know what it takes to get onto the world stage as a butcher. Because by then I'd traveled around South Africa extensively. I'd been invited through Slow Food to be on some of the international stages. And they wouldn't listen, and it was very frustrating.
How did you deal with it, though? Did you or did you walk away?
I've had to learn that sometimes you have to walk away. And that was hard for me. We landed up going to Ireland. The team did compete. During the competition, I was on my phone sending WhatsApp messages to my good friend and partner for the National Butchers Challenge, Arnold Tanzer, very well-known chef and a man who has singularly saved me more times in my life than I think anyone other than my aunt has. And one of the guy's fathers was, I don't know, he was standing behind me. And when the team finished, we went back to the hotel and I had 2 hours of being screamed at, abused, threatened. I immediately got onto a taxi, caught the taxi to the airport, and I said, "Dude, I've got to get out of this country right now," and flew back home, and that was it. That was, couldn't go through that.
Scary stuff. Staying with cuts of meat, has the industry changed in what people want to buy? And you know what I'm going to bring up, because it's been the sword of Damocles hanging over our relationship for the longest time.
Yes.
So
you did not get your goat going.
I did not get you. I'll go to you. Forget the elephant in the room. I want goat in this room. What is it, though, about that? I mean, I've eaten goat overseas. I've eaten it on the African continent. I have eaten it in South Africa, but not extensively. It doesn't seem to be a very popular meat in certain cultures. And it's sort of looked down upon, yet done correctly. It's absolutely delicious. But it's one of those meats that I battle to find, and I know that you guys do as well, because it's killed separately. There's specialized abattoirs, etc., etc. Why isn't it mainstream? And I'm just using goat as an example. I'm not picking on you.
So I'd like to be a little bit Jewish and answer a question with a question. David,
did I not see this coming?
Very good.
Sure.
When was the first time you ate goat?
The first time was probably in Congo, Brazzaville. They told us it was beef, but I did not think so. I said to my colleagues, I know they cut meat differently here. They don't so much cut it as hack it to pieces. And it was delicious. And I've had it from there to Mozambique, from Mozambique to Zanzibar. And I just loved the meat. I really and truly did. Cooked properly, it's delicious.
So it's interesting. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. goat is never treated as something of high respect and with lots of value. It's always seen as a poor person's meat. I'm going to exclude the African continent for a moment. I'm going to talk
Sure.
about the rest of the world. And the reason for that, I think, is historical. Goats are the cheapest, easiest animals to keep. So as a pastoralist, if you've got a choice between a cow that you've got to walk for kilometers with so it can graze and get sufficient nutrients and water, versus a goat where everything, including paper and cardboard, it will consume.
Yeah.
You don't have money, you're going to go with the goat. It'll bring you a little bit, but it's a goat. In Africa, it's been very interesting because goat has, and it doesn't matter where you travel, goats are used for specific traditional ceremonies. And they're not seen as a cow as money. It's seen more like incense in a ritual. So even within those rituals, there's not the same. You're not burning your money. You're burning the smell and the flavor and the history. In South Africa, we suffer from the same problem. And in fact, it's compounded because generally suburbanites do not grow up with goat. Lamb is always a bit expensive and beef is what we eat. So that really is the reason for it.
I was interviewing Sophia Lindop recently. She's brought out a new book called Going Home, which is stunning about her Lebanese roots. And we were talking about lamb specifically. And I said, every lamb recipe that she writes from now on has to say in brackets at the end, always stop. And before I could finish the sentence, she went, 2 slices sooner than you expected. Because we all do that. Lamb is so delicious that you always have just a tad too much, and it's normally a dinner meal, and then you try and go to sleep. And sleep does not come because you know that lamb is going to be repeating on you during the course of the night. And as an aside, if I may, I was at a sheep farm near Kimberley, which farms Dorper sheep. And the woman said to me, "You're not alone here this evening." I was driving back from Cape Town. I dropped my daughter off. She was going to work there. She said, "You're not going to be alone here this evening. We've got a group of Australian sheep farmers." And I went, "No, don't start. I can't deal with Australian sheep." I have to admit, they started the gags. But what had happened was they've taken Dorper sheep to Australia. And they do very well there, but the Australians hadn't learned how to judge them in competition. So they'd come to South Africa to learn how to judge them. And I think all the ones that failed that particular day got put on a barbecue for that evening. So there must have been about 270 kilograms of meat, 43,000 potatoes, 17 loaves of bread, and 2 lettuce leaves. That was it. And at the end of the meal, all the meat was gone, as were the potatoes and the bread. The lettuce leaves were still in the bowl. And needless to say, I'd partaken of a lot of that lamb, and the walk from the bride to my room in the main building that evening was less than 100 meters. I spent a lot of the night walking around my room.
That's brilliant.
So lamb is very delicious, but it should come with a warning.
Absolutely.
But aside from goat, things like ostrich, which you'd think would be relatively cheap, because again, like goats, you can just let them out, they'll eat whatever they can find. Yet ostrich seems to have become the suburban meat of choice because it's lean and it's all of those things. Is that why it's expensive? Because supply and demand?
Ostrich and venison are very interesting categories of meat. We live on the African continent. You'd think that actually would be our staple, but it's not our staple by any stretch. The ostrich industry is a very closed industry. Many years ago, the Karoo farmers, there were a couple of them who got together and they formed Klein Karoo, which effectively was a farmers' co-op to begin with. But in forming this co-op, what they landed up doing is causing tight regulation around the ostrich industry. Their focus was always driven about taking this overseas, and hats off to them. They did a really great job because the entire world believes that ostrich is the best meat to eat. It's lean and it's high in protein, and this is the perfect superfood. So they've been very good at that. The problem is, as consumers in South Africa, that means that we've been robbed of the chance to enjoy something that is unique to us. The other problem that we're faced with is that as soon as you start farming animals, you immediately start making barriers to entry for the people who actually should have market access. So me personally, you would have noticed I never stock ostrich, ever. I refuse, because it's a barrier to entry to small-scale farmers in this country, and I don't support that.
And now that segues really nicely into what you're currently doing. See what I did there?
You're so good at this. Have you done this before?
Once or twice.
So where are we now? 5 years ago.
Where are we now? That's a good question. It's 20-something.
Well, we know it can't be 2020. That got cancelled.
It did indeed. This is advanced 2020, level 63.
0.4.
0.4. 2.0.
When I did this whole conversion from free-range to grass-fed meat, there was a gentleman who lived in the area called Dennis Conway, who I'd become friends with, and another one called Tim Trueluck, who is still very well known. He's now the DA councillor. Yeah. They came into my shop one day and they said, you know what, Caroline, you're actually slow food. And I was like, no, I like fries and quick fries.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, slow food. It's a movement. And they explained to me Slow Food is an organization that now is in 161 countries around the world. And it's about good, clean, and fair food for all, promoting and protecting biodiversity. And they said, you know, because you do free-range grass-fed meat and you give a damn about where your food comes from and trying to get the consumer closer to the farmer, that's what makes you Slow Food. I thought, oh, this is great, join Slow Food. And we had some incredible dinners and interesting talks and whatnot. And I left because it felt like a little bit of a dinner club, which is nice, but not really for me. 5 years ago, I got approached by Brian Dick. Brian of Cheese Gourmet in London, the best cheese shop in the world. And again, the most incredible couple who've done good things for many, many, many people. Brian approached me and said, you know, Caroline, we really need you to come back to Slow Food because everything you said you wanted to get out of Slow Food, what we're doing. And I give you my word that if you come on board, together we will work and we'll let Slow Food be the organization that it should be and ought to be in this country. And I joined and we started doing a lot more of the, I don't want to say activist work, but the real work of connecting small-scale farmers around our country who have incredible produce, who are keeping our heritage alive in the soil by growing and doing directly to consumers. And so for the last 4 years now, I was appointed by Slow Food International, which is based in Italy, to be their regional representative for Southern Africa. And through that work, I've had the opportunity to travel extensively and always to amazing farmers, amazing people. I have eaten this beautiful continent that we call home in Africa and learned a couple of universal truths about the African soul and the African plate.
So you've gone full circle. You've become an advocate for activism.
That's exactly it. Well put. I'm going to say that's what I am now.
There you go. Where do I send the invoice? But now you talk about eating the continent. There is a program that I think has just started on the local cable channels here called Eating History. And these are two really, I always wonder about these sort of people that have found food from anything up to 60 years ago. They're now unboxing it and eating it. And you sort of go, what is the point to eating Kellogg's cornflakes from the 1930s? It's cornflakes. Did it survive? Yeah. Do we care? Does it make a difference in our lives? No, it does not. Do we watch those programs? Yes. Why? Because we're hoping they're going to throw up on camera. That's all it is.
It is, but you know, the power of TV has been remarkable. I had this whole aha moment about free-range grass-fed meat round about the same time that food shows started in our country. And DSTV had opened up its first channel, and one of the first people on it was Ainsley Harriott, and he'd stand with his hand in the air.
I
And
worked on that show.
did you?
I was the floor manager with Ains. Yeah.
That's amazing.
The South African
So,
version. We did 2 seasons here in South Africa.
Ready, Steady, Cook.
Ready, steady, cook.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So you will know that what that did was it first of all, it said everyone is allowed to cook.
Yep.
The second thing it said is that everyone is allowed to cook and be proud of it. And so long before Instagram, where everyone's life is very different online to what it is in reality, long before that, we started going, hey, our food means something.
Mm.
And oh, look, overseas, they use that. That's interesting. I wonder what that tastes like. And we are such curious people. You know, this wonderful thing about humankind is that we're curious. And through that, the entire meat industry has changed. The whole food space has changed. And even now, we're having this conversation. And I know that there are lots of people who follow you because they're interested in travel and food. And it talks to something very primordial in us.
I've discovered, being a carnivore and a proud carnivore, I discovered Wagyu beef biltong, which to me is, people call it the Rolls Royce. I've said no, it's the Aston Martin, because I'm an Aston Martin fan. To hell with Rolls Royces. They're for old people. But this was something that has reopened my eyes to the biltong that I've eaten up until now. Look, it's really expensive, but darn, it's worth it. It really and truly is. The only thing you can't do is put it in a paper packet, because that fat bleeds through in 2 seconds.
It really does. Which
But
really is the point of it, right?
well, this is it. This is it. But it is delicious. And I suppose in a way, you, I think, alluded to it earlier. We are a meat-eating country. Yes, there are vegans, and yes, there are vegetarians, but they're in the minority. And I mean, today, just before you and I started talking, I happened to be scrolling through Facebook, as one does, and there are a pair of what look like leather feldschoen shoes, but they're vegan. And I'm going, no, what are these made out of? They're made out of car tires. So therefore, they're not vegan. They're just car tire shoes. Why are they claiming now that the shoes are vegan, or vegetarian for that matter? You know,
I'm so glad you raised that. And that you got the email that we deliberately have to speak about veganism.
Yeah. I can hear the writs being written as we speak.
So,
spoiler alert, people, we are going to become anti-vegan roundabout now. Go for it, Caroline.
I actually enjoy having discussions with vegans, because effectively you get vegans for a few reasons. The first generally is, oh, I hate animal cruelty. The second is, oh, this is the cleanest way to save our planet because cows fart and they destroy our climate. And those generally are the two reasons why. Very tiny, tiny little cluster of people say they don't eat meat because they don't like the taste.
Fair enough.
But generally it's those two reasons.
Yeah.
So the work that I've been doing, there is an organization called Conservation South Africa that is an offshoot of Conservation International. The lady who started it here is a lady called Sarah Frazee. And one of their very first projects that they were given was to clear the waterways in the Eastern Cape, just outside of Mutati. She went in with her crew, they did an analysis. They said, oh, it's easy enough. All we do is we pull out these invasive species and then you'll see the waters will run clearly again. However, within 6 months, they realized it's not as easy as that. Those invasive species were coming because what had happened is that through apartheid primarily, but also through modern housing development, the way the cattle used to be rotated in that area was no longer the case. So their grazing pattern had changed. So you now had the same strip of land being used by people and animals. You had them totally overgrazing, destroying the soil, and the only thing left to grow in that soil were invasive plant species and trees. And so as a result, she very quickly figured out that if we want to save things like waterways, and we want to save things like our grasslands, which actually are critical, you needed to sort out this human-animal conflict that we had. And so actually, if you want to save the planet, we want to restore our grasslands. If we restore our grasslands in Africa, it will more than double the impact of restoring the Amazon forest. This is not spoken about by vegans. Why? Because if we're using cattle to fix the soil, to fix the grass, to fix the climate, that means we've got to eat them. Because the people who are doing it are only going to do it if we're going to commercially reward them for this work that they do. And so as a result, vegans who tell me, oh no, cows kill the planet, no, they don't. And if they think that by eating soya that travels around the world and uses up all this water, sorry, you got it wrong.
Soya is the worst, as is palm nut oil. You know, that seemed to. But I think that's a whole discussion for another chat, Caroline, where I think I need to talk to an advocate first to see if we need any sort of disclaimer, because to me there is only one person worse than a vegan, and that's a vegan who does CrossFit, because they're going to tell you about both and at length. It's not a dinner party guest.
Exactly. How do you know if a person's a vegan? They're going to tell you.
Even if you don't ask.
Exactly.
Caroline, where to for you from here on? Are you going to stick with this particular project for a while, or have you already got feelers out to see what else is out there for you?
So I've landed up being very blessed. The last 3 years I've started consulting with Conservation South Africa with Sarah. She's now created an NPO called Meat Naturally. We've been working on business models around mobile abattoirs, mobile butcheries, taking almost like a semi-franchise model into rural communities around ownership of these important tools. And that's been great, but more and more I'm starting to consult to other organizations. And it's always around the same thing. How do you open up economic opportunities for small-scale farmers in rural areas? There's a great project starting on the East Rand with with a community just on the other side of a mine. And the ladies in that area are growing their own food, but now they're wanting to create their own signature acha. They've got some traditional breads, which is such a fascinating story. It's not made from wheat, just by the by. Bread doesn't have to be wheat-based. And they want to take this and learn how to do it better, and they want to make money from it. So I'll be going in and helping them with that. My future really is going to be eating a whole lot and talking to a whole lot of farmers.
It sounds wonderful. It sounds the ideal or an idealistic lifestyle, and I wish you all the best in it. If people want to find out more about you and what you're doing, do you have a website, or are you just attached to other people's websites?
I'm attached to most of the other people's websites, which I know I have to fix. I was told that recently. But otherwise, I'm available on Facebook. I don't do very much on, but you're welcome to check it out. Twitter, don't do very much on, but you're welcome to check it out. Or otherwise, just see me at Bryanston Organic Market, because generally I'll spend a couple of hours there once a week.
Great stuff. My guest today on In Conversation With has been Caroline McCann. Caroline, thank you so much for chatting to me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, David.